everyone, welcome back to Trek a Day. We have another Star Trek book suggestion for you. This time an audiobook. The recent audiobook adaptation of A Stitch in Time by Andrew J. Robinson. The paperback novel is now extremely rare and expensive, so it's one that I had never had the chance to read, and I was very happy when this came out in 2023, and doubly excited that Andrew J. Robinson was going to be the one narrating this audiobook of the novel that he wrote himself, who also played Garak on Deep Space Nine. This is one of my favorites now, and it's definitely up there, even though the one aspect of a lot of the modern, not all of them, but a lot of the more modern audiobooks, comparison to some of the older Simon & Schuster ones from the 90s in particular, it's lacking a bit in the addition of music and sound effects and things to really liven the presentation, but it's not as noticeable in this particular one because the narration is so fantastic and spot on, and it's perfect because you have the person who portrayed that character wrote a novel about the background of that character, and then years later is reading, and it really adds something, I think, too, with something that I haven't seen talked about with this. I think the fact that he's reading it so many years later, it's a story about Garak going back to Cardassia after the end of the Dominion War, and while they're reflecting upon his life, and in the form of a letter to Dr. Bashir, we're getting a detailed look at the background of Garak. And so it's a novel mostly about reflection and examining the past, and the fact that it's been so many years now that he's now narrating about a story, about a character who he played, who's looking into the past, and kind of adds a gravitas to that, adds a real sense of truth to the narration. It really feels like someone looking back upon their life and examining it in comparison to, how things are now. How do we get to this point? So it's very engrossing. It is a brilliant narration on top of something that's already very well written, well structured, so I loved everything from that perspective. And the other thing that I really enjoyed, why I think if you're a fan of Deep Space Nine, you should check this out, is that this is probably the single most detailed examination of certain elements of Cardassian culture by going through the life of Elam Garak. And it's a fascinating exploration of the culture because it's not like reading a dry depiction of the culture as a whole and looking at all these different elements. It's very much skewed by the view of the protagonist, and it's really how he views life in Cardassia through his eyes and colored by his experience, and it gives a very unique look and feel to that exploration. And I just found it fascinating and found myself wanting something of this depth in its cultural exploration and the elegance in its portrayal for other characters, for other worlds that we have much more of a surface perspective of the culture. So it's something that I think is a fantastic addition to the story of Deep Space Nine, taking one of the most important cultures of that series and seeing a story from the inside of their culture that we never quite got before, and piecing together a lot of characters, seeing them in their past, seeing how things step by step came to be, and getting a look into Garak's mind, one of the most fascinating minds in Star Trek, really getting into where he's at emotionally and mentally after returning to Cardassia after the end of the war, and examining his own life. And because it's Garak, it also does a fun job of really playing with the notion of perspective versus reality and truth, and how much is truly as it is portrayed, and how much is changed, how much is purposely altered or swayed, and others that are just by faulty memory. It plays a lot with those ideas, which I think is really fun. And while it's exploring the truth of Garrick's life, that you also have these questions, and it's a great story that feels so truthful to the voice of the character that Andrew J. Robinson brought to life on Deep Space Nine. And it's one of the best examinations of an individual character that I've come across. So it's fantastic. I'm glad this is out. I think this is a wonderful way of experiencing that story, and at this point a much cheaper way of experiencing that story. And I think, in most cases I would prefer a novel in general to an audiobook version, but here is a case where I think that this would be my preferred choice if I had someone presented me with this and the paperback book, because in just this specific case, like, normally it's like maybe the writer reading it or some actor reading the story, but the fact that it is being narrated by the author who also played the character, I feel like this makes this the ultimate way of experiencing the story, and I'm very glad that this is the manner in which I first experienced it.